The Hebrew word Ayin means eye. Hence, this letter is the symbol for sight and for the ability to interpret what we see, namely insight. Two people can see the same thing, and yet their interpretation can be worlds apart. The two crucified men alongside Jesus are a good example. Now, when I say I see something that is being explained to me, I mean much more, of course, than simply observing an object. In fact, the phrase is synonymous with I understand. It's in this respect that the ancients spoke of the good eye and the evil eye. Once again, it wasn't the eye as such that was being defined, but the manner in which a person was interpreting what he was seeing. It was a definition of a person's outlook and therefore of their character. Undoubtedly, later on it came to mean how a person affected his surroundings. That is to say, if he had a good or generous eye and outlook, then those around would be benignly influenced. If, however, he had an evil or mean-spirited eye, then his effect on others would be malignant, possibly disastrous. Solomon therefore advises, Eat thou not the bread of him that hath an evil eye, neither desire thou his dainty meats. Proverbs 23 verse 6. As with most sayings, the negative aspect seems to have outlived the positive, for we have all heard of the evil eye, but probably few of us have heard of the good eye. In illustration of this, we could say that whilst one man is made envious and unhappy by another's success, another man is happy for that success. He shares in the other person's good news as though it were his own, and he is generous. Solomon's words once again, He that hath a bountiful eye shall be blessed, for he giveth of his bread to the poor. Proverbs 22 verse 9. Jesus referred to this in his parable of the labourers in the vineyard in Matthew chapter 20. A murmuring of complaint arose when the owner was as generous to those who had laboured for a short time as to those who had laboured long. The owner responds to their complaints, Is thine eye evil because I am good? Matthew 20 verse 15. Midrashic literature teaches that Moses had a good eye because, having received the Torah, he shared it with Israel. As a consequence of this, the Torah should always be taught with a good eye, that is to say, kindly and expansively. And if this is said of the law, how much more should we apply this to the gospel, the good news? The bounty we have been given should always be shared bountifully. The spirit should match the message. The truly humble Christian cannot help but be bold and courageous and generous toward all lost sinners, his message being a beam of light which can penetrate and dispel all the unhealthy things which multiply in the darkness and afflict men. His message is good and powerful, and he knows it. But he's compelled by love, not by arrogance. He remembers that he was saved by grace, not only so many years ago, but that very morning, that very hour. Every moment he is saved by the grace of God in Jesus. He cannot help but have a good eye. He lives in the sight of the good eye. And because of this, his whole body is full of light. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Matthew 6 verse 22, the words of Jesus. King David declared in the midst of men's unjust criticism of himself, With thee is the fountain of life. In thy light we see light. Psalm 36 verse 9. He lived in the light of God's good eye and was therefore immune to the darkness of the evil eye. David would emerge from the deepest and darkest mine with diamonds in his pockets. And for us today, that is still the best and only cure, to stand in his light, and having done all, to stand in his light. The collection of sayings called Avot, or Fathers, tells us, A good eye, a humble mind, and a lowly spirit are the tokens of the disciples of Abraham, our father. The good eye, then, is a product of a good heart. Here are two striking examples of a person's good nature expressing itself at the very moment of seeing, one in the Old Testament, the other in the New Testament. 2 Kings chapter 8 verse 7 to 15. The ailing king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, sent a messenger to the prophet Elisha to inquire whether or not he would recover from his illness. Elisha affirms that the king will certainly recover, but adds cryptically, he shall surely die. The next verse, verse 11, is very interesting and reads, He, Elisha, settled his countenance steadfastly. This literally translates as, he made his face stand. Now Rashi comments that Elisha, quote, held his expression of grief, for he wanted to cry, so as not to cry before Hazael, and he made an effort to stand and control himself until he could do so no longer, and he wept, unquote. He wept because he knew the evil that Hazael would do to the children of Israel after he had killed his king. Verse 12. Sanctified men do not grow a thick skin. But note also that the man with the good eye, Elisha, is able to comprehend the man with the evil eye, whilst the man with the evil eye finds the other incomprehensible. Elisha understands Hazael perfectly, whilst Hazael seems to be in a daze. And Paul said in 1 Corinthians 2:15, he that is spiritual judgeth all things, yet he himself is judged of no man. And it says of the coming of Jesus, the light has come into the world, and the darkness cannot comprehend it. I love that, John chapter 1, the darkness cannot understand it. Now the second example from the New Testament. Following Peter's third denial of having known Jesus, the text reads simply and meaningfully, and the Lord turned and looked upon Peter. Luke chapter 22 verse 61. Wust's version reminds us of Elisha's expression. He translated it like this, and the Lord, having turned around, fixed his gaze on Peter. Now, we don't have a description of that gaze, but we do have the record of Peter's reaction, and this tells all. It quite literally broke his heart, a term which has been spoiled with overuse and misuse, but is entirely appropriate here. There was no recrimination, you see, in the eyes of Jesus, no blame, only loving sorrow and kind concern, and possibly much deeper, the knowledge that his friend Peter would himself one day follow him to a cross of his own. But right now, in his failure and shame, Peter was wounded by the good eye of Jesus. Those wounds strike the deepest, but bring healing. The grace of God, totally undeserved, leads us to repentance, releases our true feelings, and uncovers our love for Jesus and all that he represents, the highest.